All right, as promised, here's what the Wall Street Journal said in a editorial slash master troll of Donald Trump. Quote, "The trouble with trade wars is that once they begin, they can quickly escalate and get out of control. All the more so when politicians are nearing an election campaign, as Canada now is, or when Mr. Trump behaves as if his manhood is implicated because a foreign nation won't take his nasty border taxes lying down. We said from the beginning that this North American trade war is the dumbest in history, and we were being kind."
Well, as Sue pointed out earlier, it is not clear what the objective of any of this is, other than the fact that Trump himself is personally enamored with tariffs, and perhaps the fact that the advisors who are guiding him on trade policy used to work in the steel industry, which, by the way, is the industry that is being protected, or whose honor is being protected in service of, you know, picking these wars, these trade wars with our friends and allies, including Canada and Mexico. But there's no clear objective here. Trump hasn't been consistent, at the very least, about whether he wants some kind of concessions on fentanyl, which, as Sue mentioned, there isn't really a fentanyl problem with Canada. Arguably, there is quite a bad one with Mexico. Is it about that? Is it about immigration? Is it about something else? Ostensibly, these things are grounded, the steel and aluminum tariffs are grounded in national security concerns. I'm not sure how the president's ego became a critical national security concern. But it's really difficult for any of these countries to figure out how to deal with him, because how do you negotiate with someone who doesn't know what they want?
Well, I mean, Sue, I feel like we've been having this conversation for 9 years. It's what Bill Barr called bullshit. It's all made up. There is no point. There is no objective. There is no fentanyl that comes from Canada here. I mean, it's a minuscule amount. So it's not what they say it's about. It's not about what they say it's about. It's about what Canadians feel like it's about. It's about being bullied. And,
right. No.
You know, so in terms of how does it end, I mean, you know, call in a shrink or a hostage negotiator. And it sounds like that's the kind of footing Canada's getting on.
Right. And one thing I want to point out that I don't know if everybody knows, you know, there's talk of tariffs, but in Canada, it is so much more than that, even now for American companies. Whatever's being hit with the tariff, there are U.S. goods just coming off the shelf. There are no sales. And for, you know, just alcohol is just an obvious one. There are other goods, but the shelves are empty. And that is just crushing to a number of American industries. So, I mean, Canada I talk to my friends up there and my family, and not only are they probably not going to maybe ever travel again to the United States, at least for a long time, they are trying to find any good they can that is Canadian. Canadian manufacturers are putting made in Canada stickers on everything just to make it even easier. And then the other thing that's going on that's just, and it's playing in the background, some people may have heard about it, but now Canadians coming over the border on cars via land, if they stay more than 30 days, they are being told now, and there's been some communication between the U.S. and the Canadian government, that they have to, when they come in, they have to register and be fingerprinted. Like, it just goes back to the question of what is going on here. I don't quite know what the aim is. Is it Canadian sovereignty? Is it the annexation of part of it? Is it an agreement on mineral rights, you know, similar to maybe what Trump was talking to Zelensky in the Ukraine about? You don't know, but I sort of don't blame a lot of people in Canada, including the incoming prime minister, of being concerned that it is about the sovereignty of their nation.
Well, and that's what Trump is saying on phone calls and on social media.
He's saying it out loud.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, I guess what I want to ask you is, where does the business community think we are if Trump, the narcissist's mirror, no longer includes the stock market?
It's a very challenging place, I think, for the business world to be. For a long time, I had personally assumed that one of the few firewalls against Trump's destructive and erratic behavior, at least some of it, would be the private sector, right? Because they wanted to protect their own bottom line. Maybe they don't care about some of the horrible things that he's doing, but rule of law is very good for the business environment. Property rights, very good for the business environment. Predictable pricing, regulation, things like that. Also good for the business environment. But it's not even clear that they're willing to stand up. There was a story in the Wall Street Journal today about a recent gathering of CEOs at Yale, in which the CEOs were just kind of asked to do a passing poll on how much would the stock market need to fall before they would stand up and criticize Donald Trump. And more than half of them said 20% or higher. Right? They have a fiduciary duty to their shareholders to protect the value of their stock prices. And despite all of that, they are still unwilling to criticize the president, who is personally responsible for much of the decline in stock prices. So if Trump doesn't care about the stock market decline, if executives don't really speak up despite stock market declines, I don't know where we are.
I'm happy to report that Congressman John Larson is definitely back and at full strength. He has been eating his proverbial Wheaties. He appears to be very hydrated, very energized, and may I suggest you get out of his way. Watch this.
Men and women on this committee are good people. They're honest and caring people. And that's why I do not understand why you would relegate this committee to no longer being of significance and resort to saying you will do whatever Elon Musk and Donald Trump tell you to do. Where's the independence of the committee? Where's the legislature? We're an equal branch of government. And you start off with a blather, and yet look at the empty seats here. Where's Elon Musk? I'm sure he's a genius and is a very credible person because of the wealth he's accumulated. But that does not put him above the law or the responsibility to come before this committee in this Congress. If he's so great, if these plans and all the fraud and abuse that he's found are so evident, why isn't he here explaining it? You know why. Because he's out to privatize Social Security. He's been on television the last couple of days talking exactly about Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, and what he intends to do. Privatize it. The American people, some of them may have been born at night, but not last night. People are aware of this. Every single one of your districts. Now you have someone coming in to privatize a system, something you have longed to do going back to 1982, because Elon Musk thinks that this is the best thing to do. President Trump has called Social Security a scam. Elon Musk, as the chairman, as Mr. Neal said, called it a Ponzi scheme. Ask that of the people in your district. Ask that, Mr. Smith, of the more than 198,000 people in your district who rely on Social Security, and you won't even let the person who's planning to privatize it, who's telling the big lie in front of everyone, in bold as he possibly can, saying, this is what we're going to do. The Congress is in our back pocket. We don't even have to come before them and testify, because we control the House, we control the Senate, and we control the presidency. And it's the tyranny of the executive. It's why these resolutions were first adopted back in 1789, because the founding fathers knew that the executive branch does not have total authority over the legislature unless you have a willing party that says, no, we're going to do exactly what you tell us to do, Mr. Musk and Mr. President. It doesn't matter to our constituents. It doesn't matter how much money they are not going to receive. We're not even going to tell them the truth about what's going to happen to them. They administer to over 70 million people in the nation's #1 anti-poverty program for the elderly and children. Shame! Shame! can't bring people in front of this body? If he's right, if they're so good, if they're so just, why aren't they here telling the American people about it? They're not, because you know the truth. It's about privatization. I yield back.
That is veteran Democratic Congressman John Larson of Connecticut, just ripping the bark off today about Social Security and what Republicans are really doing here. And indeed, as he was ripping that bark off in Congress, look at what the Washington Post was publishing just down the road. Quote, Social Security facing pressure from DOJ weighs big cuts to phone service. Agency considers ending phone program that is used by millions of elderly and disabled Americans. One gobsmacked Social Security Administration employee told the Post today that this radical change, this radical cut to services that they were moving on in the Trump administration, quote, would be the single largest service disruption in agency history ever. The single largest service disruption in Social Security ever. Elon Musk's plan for Social Security was to, quote, end telephone service for claims processing, instead directing elderly and disabled people to the internet and to in-person field offices. Quote, the agency's toll-free number is a mainstay for older customers who do not have online access or who have trouble navigating the internet. About 40% of the claims that get made to Social Security are made over the phone, using this phone line that Elon Musk now wants to kill. 40% of the claims at the agency. And naturally, this move to close the phone line and instead force old people and disabled people to go in person to in-person field offices, naturally that comes as Donald Trump is firing 7,000 people who work at Social Security and closing tons of the aforementioned field offices. President Biden's Social Security Administrator, former Maryland Governor Martin O'Malley, ripped the bark off himself in his comments to the Post on this planned cut. Quote, it would certainly appear, he said, that they're trying to break the capacity of the agency to serve its customers. And I suppose if they're trying to dismember the agency, liquidate its assets, sell pieces of it to their billionaire friends to run, they have to discredit the agency in the eyes of its customers, and they do that by breaking its ability to serve. The Post says, quote, the DOJ-driven proposal to shift all claims processing online and to in-person offices has spurred pushback internally, employees said, and from outside experts, for the same reasons, that it would be likely to imperil millions of Americans' ability to receive their earned benefits. This is what they're doing. This is what's going on. And so this is what happens today. Congressman John Larson, who I just showed you, screams his freaking head off in Congress about it this morning. Screams at them. And then at noon, the Washington Post publishes this horror movie script about their plan, indeed, to rip the guts out of Social Security. Beyond firing everybody, which they're already doing, right? Beyond closing the field offices, they're now making it so that old and disabled people literally cannot call anyone to find out what's going on. But then you know what happened? They caved. They decided not to do it. Don't let anybody tell you that pushback doesn't work. Don't let anybody tell you that yelling and making a fuss doesn't matter, or that journalism doesn't matter. I mean, it doesn't always matter, but honestly, it's the only thing that ever does. Every single time you don't try, you lose. But sometimes when you try, you win. It's the reason it's worth trying. And so now this is the headline at the Washington Post as of 7 o'clock tonight. Quote, Social Security scraps far-reaching cuts to phone services after Post report. Quote, the Social Security Administration late Wednesday abandoned plans it was considering to end phone service for millions of Americans filing retirement and disability claims after the Washington Post reported that Elon Musk's U.S. DOGE service team was weighing the change. The shift would have directed elderly and disabled people to rely on the internet and in-person field offices to process their claims, curtailing a service that 73 million Americans have relied on for decades to access earned government benefits. They were going to do this. We did good journalism exposing that this is what they were planning on doing. And the resulting eruption scared them and made them not do it. Pushback matters. Exposing what they are doing matters. Demanding Republicans fill the chair, show up, invite the witnesses in, let us question people, demanding that Republicans actually answer for what Trump is doing, Republicans actually explain themselves, try to justify what it is he's doing. It turns out those demands can have an effect.
Governor Tim Walz is a Democrat of Minnesota, a state heavily impacted by Trump's government purges and its trade war with Canada, which, of course, it borders. Governor Walz joins me now. Governor, great to have you on the program.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
Let me just start with what this all looks like from your position as governor of Minnesota. Obviously, a state right next to Canada. I imagine you have good relationships. I imagine there's a lot of trade that goes on between your state and Canada. What has this all meant for your state?
Yeah, Minnesotans like Canadians. We share a lot, and we share a great relationship. First of all, they're our biggest trading partners. It's incredibly disruptive. The number of people who cross the border both ways, Minnesotans going into Canada to work and Canadians coming into Minnesota. It's beneficial to both of our countries. Look, we get 90% of our potash, which is the fertilizer for our huge ag economy. That's real impacts on real producers, driving up costs for producers at a time when we can't sell our products because Donald Trump has this ridiculous trade war going on. And just quite honestly, the chaos and the uncertainty that it causes, so many Minnesotans are asking, when was Canada our enemy? And it makes no sense. It's very difficult as a governor to be able to set and think about budgets, to be able to think about how are we going to continue to attract folks here. And then he starts, as he did today, a day that I've dreaded as a teacher, as a parent of a student in public schools, and as governor, a senseless attack on the Department of Education. And I hope that I think your viewers know there's no plan behind this. Donald Trump doesn't know how anything works. Donald Trump is this caricature that had a reality TV show that pretended like he knew how to run businesses. The reality is he doesn't. As a governor, we have to make these things work. Local school districts have to understand what are the impacts going to be when you lay off 1,300 experts who are there to make sure that every one of our children get an equitable education. And so it's chaos. And look, I think he thrives in this. And then he tells his supporters that only he can fix it. He's the guy who goes and starts the fire and then stands there and gives directions and acts like he knows how to put the fire out. He has no clue. So it's an arsonist with our economy. It's an arsonist with our institutions. He surrounds himself with people. The idea that the Secretary of Education would not know what IDEA meant, Individual with Disability and Education Act, that's like your mechanic not knowing how to put air in your tire. And she's in charge of this nation's educational progress. It is catastrophic. And look, the short-term numbers you were talking about, Chris, are real. And I think it flips people like, oh, you know, people who say, I voted for Donald Trump. I didn't know he would fire me. No kidding. No kidding. What I worry about is the generational change that this would make. Look, Ruby Bridges needed to be escorted into those schools and the folks who went into Little Rock because we didn't have an education department that ensured her civil rights were respected. That's gone now. And my son, those of you, your viewers who are out there now who have individual education plans that let them thrive and be their best people, what do they want us to do? Warehouse these kids, not give them the skills? And this is going to impact local schools directly. So it is absolute chaos. And the question I ask is, you said it, Chris. He didn't run on this stuff. He told you he'd lower prices. You know the one thing Linda McMahon in her press conference did not say? She did not use the word children, if I'm not mistaken.
She did not talk about educational outcomes. They view education as an expense, just like Elon Musk talks about entitlement programs. Those aren't entitlement programs. Those are the things keeping my mom alive. She paid into Social Security for 80 years. She should get that money back, and that's not what they believe.
I want to go back just on that Canada issue and then come back around to the education cuts. I mean, you know, this insanity about we're going to take Canada, 51st state, calling Justin Trudeau governor. It's nuts and it's stupid and it's silly. But at a certain level, it's like, I think across the border, understandably, they're starting to take it seriously. It's the only possible feasible rationale that anyone could kind of figure out for this trade war he's launching. And I wonder, again, as a border state with relationships, you've been talking to your other leaders in Canada. There was this 25% surcharge on your electricity, which was dropped at the last second.
Yeah.
Like, what do you make of those threats and what they mean to that relationship between our two nations?
Yeah. Yeah, and so I don't blame the Canadians. They have to respond to protect their sovereignty and what they're doing. And when Donald Trump puts these on and takes them off, this has so much more damage than him pretending like it didn't impact. We have become untrustworthy. Yeah. And so if they are buying our soybeans or they're buying our corn, they're going to go look for a fair trading partner. And what Donald Trump doesn't understand, he thinks what he did in 2018, where we subsidized farmers to the tune of about $1.63 per bushel of soybeans just to keep them above water as he was fighting his trade war. We lost markets that took us decades to cultivate. They went to Brazil. They went to Argentina. And now we've got a surplus of products while input costs have gone up and nowhere to sell them. This is catastrophic. I had an event out on a farm. I know many of those people didn't vote for us. But what I know about farmers is they understand international trade a hell of a lot better than Donald Trump. And they know this is just ridiculous. I think he gets this in his head. And it's, it's like pretend for him, like it's not real. These are long-term cultural shared values. They matter. And the damage that's being done, the lack of trust that's happening, very difficult. So when I call Premier Ford or I call to Manitoba, they feel bad. They know that this is not all the American people doing it, but they feel like they have no recourse except to respond accordingly. And again, he negotiated the damn trade deal with them. If trade is so bad with Canada, he was the guy who signed the deal. It defies logic. But look, I think this is how he ran business. He stiffed contractors. He stiffed workers. He doesn't pay his bills. He declares bankruptcy. The one thing is, his claim that he's the business president, he is the worst possible business executive that I have ever witnessed. And I hope, this is what we need. I need the business community to speak up. The Wall Street Journal, thank you. Thank you for saying this is the stupidest trade war, because I've been saying it. And so now I can go back to my constituents, Republican constituents, and say, this is the reality of what you're facing. So, again, there is going to be pain. The richness of a sitting senator like Tommy Tuberville or Elon Musk telling us we're going to have to endure pain. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Again, I think Americans have had it. I hope they've had it. And now we just need to do what we can do to make the case. And look, I own this. We wouldn't be in this mess if we'd have won the election. And we didn't. We have to make sure that Americans know it's not just that Donald Trump is bad, but we're offering them something better. And I think that's what we need to work on.
Let me ask you about that. You said I own this. I mean, obviously, I think, look, after any election, there's just a billion different counterfactuals you can run. There's so many different things. One of the things I've seen in a few interviews you've given, which I think is interesting, is a sense that the campaign that you and your running mate Kamala Harris ran was risk averse, that it was careful. And one of the things I've really perceived is it seems to me there's a huge gap between Musk, Trump, and MAGA world, which seem recklessly risk-seeking. I mean, truly, there's no amount of risk they can't brook. Like, they really want as much risk as possible. And Democrats who seem excessively risk-averse. Do you think it's a fair characterization? Am I onto something here?
No, I think you are. And look, I'm conservative. I believe that systems work for a long time, that you don't have to break them. Are there improvements that need to be done? Yes. And I think we're guilty of sometimes of not acting. Could the Department of Education be more efficient? Absolutely. Are there things we can do there? To get rid of it makes no sense. And so my point on this, and again, I'm probably the last person to give advice because we didn't get it done. But I just felt like Donald Trump floods the zone with this. And I think, Chris, if you'd go ask the average American, what does the Department of Education do? They might not have a clear vision of it. So when Trump says it's a bunch of bureaucrats interfering with your local schools, give local control, we'll give you the money, it sounds pretty good. And we have not provided what that alternative looks like.
Right.
And so, yeah, I think it's fair. And look, I do agree. And I think there's a place for this, the disruptors, the folks that shake up systems in a way that are positive for people. But I keep saying this. What is the goal at the end of the day? What is the goal and where is it backed up? There's not a single economist backs tariffs. There's no one there. You know, Linda McMahon, I bet she's never been in a public school. What is she going to do to improve our students' outcomes and lives? And there's a vacuum for us to fill. We should get out there and fill it. Talk about what we're going to do.
Speaking of filling a vacuum, there was word reported last week, the head of the Republican Congressional Committee that sort of, you know, is talking to those frontline members, basically telling all members, House members, Republican members, don't have town halls. It's not worth it. You're just going to get yelled at. Don't do it. And a few Democrats, and I think you're one of them, have basically said, look, we'll do it. If you've got an area of this country that you want to talk to someone and your own Republican rep won't talk to you, I'll go do it. Is that still an open offer from you?
Yeah, I'm going. I'm going Friday, I think. I'm headed to Iowa. I'm going to go do it. I've been asked by these folks if it works. I'm going to go use the platform that I have and hand them the megaphone to talk about this. I wouldn't do those town halls if I were them either, because they have to defend cutting Medicare, cutting Medicaid, hurting their local public school, fighting a trade war with Canada, just the nonsense and defending President Musk. So I lived through these in 2010 when the Tea Party was there, and they're telling them that these are outside agitators. I heard a few Democrats in 2010 try and say, oh, don't worry about it. These are outside agitators. They were not. They were my neighbors. Right. And they were mad and confused about what was going to happen. Now, did the Republicans gin those up? Yeah, they threw fuel on that fire. I'm going to go out there and make sure that those folks down in Iowa know that their rep doesn't want to come talk to him, but he voted for this stuff. He voted to defund these things. He voted to make it impossible to talk to the VA and cut 70,000 people to care for our veterans. By the way, many of those 70,000 veterans themselves. So I think, again, this is us going out and talking to people, making the case that people are absolutely clear that both parties are not the same. One stands with Elon Musk, the billionaires, and the dismantling of America as we know it, and one that's going to be there for their families. And if we're not out there, Donald Trump, all the podcasts, all the money will fill that void. Yeah. So, yeah, I'm going. And if they ask, I'll go. And look, I hope people show up at that town hall and say, look, Governor, what are you offering? Are you offering anything better? That's fair. But not to turn your back and not do it, it's dangerous. Dangerous.
Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, thank you so much for your time tonight, sir. Come back anytime.
Good evening. I'm Alicia Menendez, and we begin this hour with the adage, you reap what you sow. You may remember back in 2022 when Republicans on the House Judiciary Committee posted this 3-word tweet elevating who they deemed to be the leaders of their party: Kanye West, Elon Musk, and Donald Trump. While Republicans have since come to disavow Kanye West, they have gone all in on the other two, falling in line with each of the extreme actions being taken by Trump, by Musk, and by their Doge since January 20th. Republicans own this, and they know it is not good. There is a reason why Republicans have been told to cower from town halls and facing their constituents who are absolutely enraged at what is being done all across this country. We saw late yesterday the most recent of these destructive actions with the mass firings at the Department of Education, effectively gutting the agency with the ultimate goal of erasing it entirely. The GOP's fearless leader will say he is shaking things up. In reality, he is screwing things up. Just this morning, a federal judge in Baltimore who heard arguments on the legality of the mass firings of federal employees. The U.S. district judge appeared skeptical of the arguments made by the administration and suggested he could reverse those Doge terminations and grant a temporary restraining order that would bring the thousands of fired federal workers back into service. Joining me now is Colorado Attorney General Phil Weisler, one of the many state attorneys general suing the Trump administration over the mass firings of federal workers. Sir, it is good to see you. Your sense of what we can expect to hear from this judge when he ultimately delivers his ruling.
My sense is this is yet another case. This is the 7th case I brought. The first 6 we have preliminary relief orders already in place. This one involves required notice. What people need to understand about these federal employees and the level of outrage is so many people here in Colorado, across the U.S., were told with no notice your job is gone. That violates the law. There's a 60-day requirement. That's in there for a good reason, to give people a chance to adjust. One of my colleagues, Chris Mays, had a town hall in Arizona, and someone said, I worked at the VA, I provide critical therapy, I was told to leave immediately. My patients didn't know that they were losing me. There was no adjustment. Look at that throughout the government, the Veterans Administration, the Education Department. I know we'll talk more about what's happening there. When you look what's happening in Colorado, our national parks are a treasure, and people are being laid off, cut back. We're worried about people's access to our public lands. This is something the public is getting very concerned about. We just had town halls in Colorado twice in the last week. One virtual, 5,000 people, one in person, close to 2,000. People's voices are being heard. We're standing up and we're fighting back.
General Wester, help me understand something, which is, so all these people get laid off. They exit the building. If they're in the building, they shut their laptops. If they work remotely, what happens if they're reinstated? Administratively speaking, how does any of that work?
This is a mess, because instead of doing something orderly with a scalpel, it's being done in a disorderly, non-strategic, and fairly haphazard way. People have heard about nuclear inspectors being fired only to be told, oh, no, we actually need you. Bird flu inspectors being fired, et cetera. And when you're going to tell people to come back after they've been fired, it's chaotic. Think about how much disruption is happening to critical services, air traffic controllers, and more. The American people are seeing up close in all the ways we rely on our federal government. We shouldn't have to learn that, because tragedies happen because key employees have been let go before people even know what they're doing.
You bring up the exact right point, which is, yes, there is the impact that it is having on the individuals who work at these organizations. There is the impact to the rest of us of the services that they work on not being rendered. I'm sure you saw the president was asked today whether he feels responsible for the fact that so many of these people are losing their jobs. And he said, sure, I do. I feel very badly, but many of them don't work at all. Many of them never showed up to work. When we cut, we want to cut, but we want to cut the people that aren't working or not doing good jobs. He told reporters during an Oval Office meeting with the Prime Minister of Ireland, we're keeping the best people. Is that your sense, that they are, in fact, keeping the best people, that there is anything here that is based on performance, that type of audit has even been completed, and that this is not just a mass firing?
There's no sense that there's any strategy, there's any assessment, or any plan. In the 1990s, President Clinton and Vice President Gore did a very thorough assessment, a reinventing government initiative, which is valuable. It was well done then. Something like that could be done now, but that's not what's happening. What's being happening is employees are being willy-nilly let go, sometimes by what unit they're in. The Public Integrity Department, Public Integrity section of the Justice Department investigates corruption. That's apparently being shuttered. The agency that handles financial aid at the Department of Education, helping people as they apply for and receive financial aid, is being shuttered. This is not happening because of an overall plan. It's being done in a way that is lacking care, and the American people are going to feel these harms. You are right. It's not just the workers. It's the harm to the public. It is all a travesty. It doesn't have to be this way. One could say, let's make government work better, sign me up for that. But what we're seeing is not about government work better. It's about disabling and dismantling government, often because of maybe a policy difference. And this is an important point, Alicia. This is not the executive's job to say, we don't like the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Congress set up that agency. Only Congress can dismantle it. And yet we have an executive branch acting as if they get to make the laws, not only the requirement that they execute them.
Well, while he is busy dismantling those agencies, he is busy protecting Tesla dealerships. Just yesterday, he said he will label violence against those dealerships as domestic terrorism. Today, you had Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene saying she sent a letter to Attorney General Pam Bondi, FBI Director Kash Patel, asking for an investigation into those incidents as domestic terrorism. Do you believe that these protests at Tesla dealerships meet the definition of domestic terrorism?
No definition that I can think of. First off, I've only heard about peaceful protests. And this is something that is very important. If someone does any violence, if someone destroys property or hurts somebody, they should be arrested. But if someone decides to protest because they're expressing their political point of view, for example, that the Department of Government Efficiency, as it's so called, or DOGE, is engaging in violations of our privacy, that's the right of every American to protest on your point of view in the way you see fit. And as long as you're doing so in a way that respects the law, you're in your First Amendment interests. Let me make another point about an attack on the First Amendment, because we also saw today a judge rule that an executive order that sought to take down a law firm, target a law firm based on its political views and who they represent, the judge said that order was un-American, unconstitutional, and a threat to the First Amendment and the very core commitment of the rule of law. We need to respect this basic foundation of our republic. People have the right of free speech. People have the right to hire lawyers, and the government should not be trying to pick the viewpoints they like in the marketplace and silence other ones. The cure for speech you don't like is more speech. If you love Tesla, then say how great Tesla is. If you love Doge, say how great Doge is. But don't try to criminalize or punish people for expressing their point of view.
Joining us now, Democratic Congressman Jim Himes of Connecticut. He's the ranking member on the House Intelligence Committee. Good to have you on. What do you make of what we hear so far about this potential deal? And also Marco Rubio making it very clear that Russia's response will make it very clear to all of us where they stand on peace.
Yeah, Mika, I was sort of chuckling at your characterization at the top of the hour of Ukraine agreeing to a ceasefire. They didn't agree to a ceasefire. They bent the knee to the extortion that started in the Oval Office when President Trump and Vice President Vance beat up on Zelensky, cut off his flow of arms, and cut off the intelligence sharing that every day saves lives in places like Kyiv. So no surprise there when you're being extorted by the most powerful country in the world. Eventually, you have to go along with it. Now, a ceasefire is a good thing. Fewer people will die. The resumption of intelligence to Russia, to Ukraine, I should say, about Russia is a good thing. But let's be very clear about what's going to happen in this ceasefire. The Russians are going to take advantage of their industrial might to move troops to surround the Kursk salient, where, as you know, the Ukrainians had invaded into Russia, and to reposition for a much more bloody subsequent follow-up once the ceasefire, as it inevitably will, is ended.
Congressman, certainly you express real pessimism there that Russia will abide to this in at least any meaningful way, perhaps beyond the 30 days. So what does need to happen, in your estimation, for a more permanent end to this conflict?
Well, and let me be clear here. I think that, Russia thinks in terms of years and decades with respect to Ukraine, as we saw, because they really started this invasion in 2014, 11 years ago when they went into Crimea. So I don't know that Putin sort of 6 months from now is on the move. But this doesn't end because, of course, the way that this has come about is one that says to Vladimir Putin, this is painful and expensive, but eventually you get what you want, especially if Donald Trump is president. So, again, we'll need to see what sort of security guarantees are ultimately given to the Ukrainians. Donald Trump says there will be none. That plus Putin learning that, expensive though it may be, he achieves his aims is something that he learns. By the way, it's something that President Xi in Beijing also learns with respect to what he may or may not do in Taiwan. So, again, I don't know if this is a disaster in the next 6 months or the next 6 years, but given the way that the United States has behaved, this is a disaster being set up.
Well, your characterization, though a Democrat, and people watching may think, well, he's just saying that because he's an elected Democrat. It lines up a good bit with what the Wall Street Journal editorial page says. In fact, the headline is Ukraine bows to Trump ceasefire. I am curious, though. The Biden administration, for years, said this war was not going to be won militarily. What Marco Rubio said flying over to Saudi Arabia, as I said on the show a few days ago, echoed what I heard from the Biden administration all the way back to 2023. So What does need to be done, in your estimation, to make sure that this ceasefire is permanent?
Yeah, Joe, fair characterization, by the way, and you sort of brought partisanship into this, so let me indicate how I think about this partisanship. You characterized Biden's position exactly right, which is that this was not going to be won. The way this would have been won would have been 3 years ago when the Russians first invaded, if the Biden administration had given the Ukrainians quickly the weapons they needed to push the Russians back. That did not happen. Instead, we, for a period of years, gave the Ukrainians the weapons they needed to lose slowly. That's a bad strategy that was implemented by the Biden administration, if what we're talking about here is partisan views. But to your question, your forward-looking question, the key now is security guarantees, right? So, we cut the ground out from under Ukraine. Why the president chose to do that rather than with Russia, I have my theories on, but we cut the ground out from under Ukraine. Now the question is, what security guarantees will be provided? Donald Trump says no. My guess is that Europe is going to come up with something. But if there are not good security guarantees that make it obvious to Putin that he cannot go beyond whatever line of ceasefire he gets to, this will happen again. And it will be, to a significant measure, our fault. To the early waffling of the Biden administration, to the Republican Party, which delayed aid in the Congress for a year, and now, of course, to that Chamberlain in Munich moment when the president and the vice president beat up on President Zelensky in the Oval Office and voted with Russia and North Korea against our allies in the United Nations.
And again, the partisanship that you say I brought up was actually bipartisanship, saying that both you as a Democrat and the conservatives who support the Republicans for the most part on the Wall Street Journal editorial page are also deeply concerned with this. Do you believe, we were talking to Ambassador McFaul yesterday, do you believe the possibility of a European peacekeeping force and American business interests in Ukraine combine in the future to build a sort of tripwire against a future Putin invasion? Because as Ambassador McFaul said, those mining interests that Donald Trump talks about, that's not like a 6-month plan. You go in, you invest, you build infrastructure, and it's years in the making. Does that provide a tripwire that provides security for Ukraine?
Not even close, Joe. I mean, this whole bit of extortion where we are demanding minerals in exchange for helping the Ukraine, is just absurd. No, I mean, let me tell you how this happens, right? 2 years from now, when there's a bunch of American mining companies in eastern Ukraine, and Putin decides that the Trump administration is coming to a close, so he needs to finish this thing, he makes up some sort of provocation on the part of the Ukrainians. He says, "Oh my gosh, they did this. We are going to move in some troops, and we're going to start, setting up a no-fly zone, so you better get your people out." That's how that ends. Now, so that's a sham. That's a complete sham. Could the Europeans put together a peacekeeping force? Probably not today, but, Europe has sat up and taken notice that the United States no longer stands with them. So I think that over the course of the next couple of years, they're going to do what they need to do to develop a pretty significant military capability. And if they have the fortitude, which this administration and candidly the Biden administration didn't show, put enough of that military capability into and around Ukraine to deter a Russian, advance. But right now, that's not really a thing.
So, ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee, Democratic Congressman Jim Himes of Connecticut, thank you very much for coming on the show this morning. We appreciate it.